Ladies and gentlemen, the moment we've all been waiting for, the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. The audience erupts, but it's not the usual standing ovation. Some cheer, others jeer. The energy is electric, half celebration, half confrontation. This isn't just another interview. This is a battleground. Cut. 2. The camera zooms in on J.D. Vance, stepping onto the brightly lit stage of the Bennett Hour. His expression? Calm, controlled, calculated. He's been in tough spots before. But is this one? This one feels different. Marcus Bennett, the ruthless talk show host known for taking down political figures, is already seated, waiting like a lion about to pounce. His signature smirk is locked in place, the kind that says, "You walked into my trap and you don't even know it yet." J.D. adjusts his tie, takes a seat, and the air in the room shifts. The audience can feel it, the silent war that's about to unfold. The studio lights burn hot. The audience is packed, a mix of political junkies, activists, and the occasional celebrity looking to trend on Twitter. From the control room, the producers whisper frantically into their headsets. This episode? It's a big one. The network is expecting record-breaking ratings. Why? Because J.D. Vance isn't just here for an interview. He's here for a reckoning. And Bennett? Oh, he's ready for war. As J.D. settled into his chair, he noticed something strange. A camera operator, a man in his late 50s with graying hair and years of experience, gave him the slightest shake of the head. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But J.D. caught it, a warning. He didn't know the guy's name, but he had seen that look before. It was the look a Marine sergeant gives a young recruit before they step into an ambush. Something was off, but it was too late now. The cameras rolled. The trap was already closing. Marcus Bennett leans forward, his grin widening like a hunter locking onto his prey. Bennett, smirking. "Mr. Vice President, let's be real. You weren't exactly Trump's biggest fan, were you?" J.D. doesn't blink, doesn't flinch. He knows exactly where this is going. Vance, calmly. "Marcus, that's a great question." He leans back, unbothered. This isn't his first battle. But what J.D. doesn't know, Marcus Bennett isn't playing fair. What's about to happen next will send shockwaves through the entire country. A hush settled over the studio. The camera zoomed in, J.D. Vance's on one side and Marcus Bennett icing the other. Two men, two agendas, but only one would leave unscathed. Bennett's smirk widened. He had spent weeks preparing verbal knives. The pro, and now, it was time to strike. Bennett, mockingly. "You know, Mr. Vice President, just a few years ago you called Donald Trump a cultural heroin injection for America. But now here you are, his right-hand man. Quite the transformation. Wouldn't you say? Boom!" The audience collectively inhaled. This was it, the moment they were waiting for. The ambush had begun. J.D. didn't blink. The question was a trap, wrapped in velvet but lined with steel. Answer wrong, and the headlines would be brutal. Vance flips on Trump, again. J.D. caught in his own words. Vice President tries and fails to justify hypocrisy. Bennett knew it. The producers knew it. J.D. knew it. But what they didn't know was that J.D. had seen this exact move before. J.D. leaned forward just slightly, the kind of movement a poker player makes when they're holding an unbeatable hand. Vance, calm, unwavering. "You know, Marcus, I was wrong about a lot of things back then. But let me tell you what changed my mind." He let the sentence linger, forcing Bennett to lean in. "In 2019, I visited a factory in Ohio, a place that used to be the heart of a thriving town, where fathers taught their sons the same trade, where hard work meant something. But when I got there," J.D. paused, his expression darkening. "The machines were off. The workers were gone. The only sound? The wind whistling through a broken window. The man who ran the place, third-generation steelworker, told me how NAFTA had gutted his town. How bad trade deals signed by politicians who never set foot in places like Middletown, Ohio, stole their livelihoods. He looked straight at Bennett. Now, and you know what he told me? He said the only person who gave a damn was Donald J. Trump. The audience went dead silent. Even Bennett's smirk faltered just for a second. Bennett regrouped quickly, shuffling his note cards. This was not the direction he wanted. Bennett, clearing throat. But surely, Mr. Vice President, J.D. wasn't finished. You see, Marcus, people like you think changing your mind is a weakness. But real leaders, they grow, they evolve, they admit when they're wrong. You sit here in this nice studio, under bright lights, never having to worry about making payroll or watching your town decay. So tell me, J.D. leaned in now, voice deadly calm. Have you ever had to tell a family they don't have a job anymore? Bennett froze. The audience, stunned. The control room was in chaos. Producers were scrambling, mouthing, cut, cut to the director. This wasn't how the interview was supposed to go. Bennett swallowed hard. He needed to take control back. Fast. He shuffled his cards, then pivoted to his next attack. All right, Mr. Vice President, Bennett said, his voice tightening. Let's talk about your speech at the National Prayer Breakfast. You said, and I quote, "Leaders need divine guidance." Don't you think that's a dangerous mixing of church and state? It was a sharp turn, an attempt to catch J.D. off balance. But what happened next, no one saw coming. Bennett thought he had regained control. The shift to religion was supposed to put J.D. on the defensive, to paint him as out of touch, a man trying to impose his faith on an entire country. But the moment the words left his mouth, something shifted. J.D. didn't hesitate. He didn't fumble. Instead, he smiled, just slightly. Not a grin of arrogance, not the smirk of a man caught in a lie. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly what was coming next. And that was terrifying. Vance, calmly. You know, Marcus, let me tell you a story. It's about a man named Sergeant Daniel Carter. A murmur rippled through the audience. No one had heard this name before. Even Bennett hesitated. J.D. leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the armrests, voice lowering, forcing everyone to lean in. Sergeant Carter was a Marine, served 3 tours in Afghanistan, came home to Tennessee expecting to find the American dream waiting for him. Instead, he found a foreclosure notice on his childhood home in a country that had already forgotten him. A hush fell over the studio. Even the producers in the control room stopped moving. He tried to fight back. Got a job as a mechanic, worked 14-hour days. But it wasn't enough. One night, he sat in his truck, hands gripping the steering wheel, wondering if it was even worth it anymore. The audience held their breath. But then, something happened. J.D. let the words hang, his gaze locked onto Bennett's. A man knocked on his window. A pastor. He didn't preach. He didn't tell him what he should or shouldn't do. He just listened. And when Sergeant Carter finally spoke, the first words out of his mouth were, "I just need a sign that someone up there is listening." J.D. straightened. That was 10 years ago. Today, Sergeant Carter runs a nonprofit helping veterans find jobs. And you know what he told me last year? That without faith, without someone reminding him that God still had a plan for him, he met Bennett's gaze. He wouldn't be here today. The silence in the studio was deafening. Bennett's fingers twitched. He glanced at his producers. He needed to get control back, fast. That's a powerful story, Mr. Vice President, he said, clearing his throat. But, with all due respect, we're talking about policy here. Faith is personal, and not everyone. Faith is what built this country, Marcus. J.D. didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The weight in his tone did the work for him. The men who founded this nation believed in something bigger than themselves. The soldiers who stormed Normandy carried more than just weapons. They carried prayers. Every time a firefighter runs into a burning building, every time a mother works a double shift to put food on the table, they're holding on to something unseen. And if you think that has no place in leadership, then I have to ask. He paused, letting the tension stretch. What do you believe in? For the first time in his career, Marcus Bennett was speechless. His eyes darted across the studio. He needed a comeback, a retort, something. But there was nothing. The audience wasn't jeering. They weren't laughing. They were thinking. And in politics, that was dangerous. Bennett licked his lips, trying to find an escape. He shuffled his note cards again. J.D. could almost hear the paper crinkling. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a war. And Bennett? He was losing. Bennett swallowed hard. His career had been built on control, guiding interviews, setting traps, making even the most seasoned politicians squirm. But this was different. J.D. wasn't playing defense. He wasn't dodging questions or spinning answers. He was attacking. And now the audience wasn't looking at Bennett like the all-knowing, sharp-tongued host of primetime television. They were looking at a man in trouble. Bennett knew he had one shot, one chance to turn the tide before J.D. completely flipped the script on him. He adjusted his tie, forced a quick chuckle, and leaned in as if sharing a secret. Well, Mr. Vice President, that was quite a sermon. But let's get back to reality, shall we? J.D. said nothing, he just waited. You tell a touching story about a Marine who found faith, that's great. But what about the people who don't have faith? What about the people who just need action? Because last time I checked, prayer doesn't lower gas prices, belief doesn't put food on the table, and sermons don't stop crime in our streets. The audience stirred, some nodded, others stiffened in their seats. It was a classic Bennett move, appeal to practicality, make faith look like wishful thinking instead of real leadership. J.D. should have seen it coming. But instead of looking rattled, he did something unexpected. He laughed. You're absolutely right, Marcus. That threw everyone off. Even Bennett blinked. Prayer doesn't lower gas prices. Faith doesn't build highways. Sermons don't stop bullets. J.D. leaned forward, his voice lowering, not out of weakness, but out of certainty. But let me ask you something, Marcus. Do you know what built the tallest skyscrapers in this country? What powered the engines that sent men to the moon? What gave a group of farmers with muskets the courage to take on the most powerful empire in the world? Bennett opened his mouth. J.D. didn't give him the chance. It wasn't government. It wasn't policies. It was belief. In something bigger. In the impossible. In the idea that this nation could be more than just land and laws, but a place where anything was possible. The problem isn't that Americans have too much faith, Marcus. It's that we've started believing in nothing at all. We've stopped believing in each other. Stopped believing in our country. Stopped believing that no matter how bad things get, we can rise up and fix them. That's the real crisis. And that, J.D. leaned back, letting his words settle. That's what I intend to change. Bennett knew this was bad. J.D. wasn't fighting him anymore. He had sidestepped the battlefield entirely. Instead of defending faith, he had made lack of faith the real problem. Bennett needed to reclaim control. Fast. All right, he said, forcing a smile. Inspiring words. But let's talk numbers, not speeches. Because at the end of the day, people don't pay their rent with belief. They pay it with money. So tell me, how does a man like you, who believes so much in faith, actually plan to fix the economy? J.D. didn't hesitate. By bringing back something that Washington forgot a long time ago, Bennett raised an eyebrow. And what's that? J.D. locked eyes with him. The room shifted. It wasn't applause. It wasn't outrage. It was something more dangerous. It was an agreement. Bennett's producers were panicking in his earpiece. He could hear them scrambling for a new angle, a new attack, a way to get back on top. Because in just a few words, J.D. had done something almost impossible on live television. He had won the audience. For the first time in his career, Marcus Bennett felt it. Loss of control. This was his show, his turf, his rules. He had spent decades mastering the art of the takedown, exposing hypocrisy, dismantling arguments, watching powerful men sweat under the heat of his questions. Not tonight. J.D. wasn't sweating. He wasn't dodging. He wasn't flustered. He was winning. The energy in the room had shifted. Bennett could see it in the audience's eyes, the way they leaned in, the way they nodded, the way some of them, even his usual supporters, looked at J.D. with something he hadn't expected. Respect. Bennett's producers were buzzing in his earpiece. Push back. Change the subject. Hit him with the numbers again. But none of it would matter, because deep down Bennett knew something terrifying. J.D. wasn't just answering questions. He was telling a story people wanted to believe in. And nothing was more dangerous than a good story. Bennett squared his shoulders. Fine. If J.D. wanted a story, he'd give him one. Work, Bennett repeated, his voice even. That's your plan? That's your solution? Sounds great in a speech, but what does that even mean? J.D. held his gaze. It means this country was built by people who worked. Not just physically, but mentally, spiritually, as a community. Somewhere along the way, Washington forgot that. So you're saying people aren't working hard enough? J.D. shook his head. No, I'm saying the system was designed to make sure their work doesn't matter. A ripple went through the audience. Bennett latched onto it. All right then, Mr. Vice President. If that's the case, then let's talk about your own work history. You talk about belief, faith, rebuilding America, but let's not forget, you spent years as a corporate lawyer before you ever touched politics. So tell me, how does a man who once defended billion-dollar companies suddenly claim to understand the working class? J.D. smiled, not a smirk, not a politician's polished grin, a real smile. I was wondering when you'd bring that up. Bennett blinked. You're right, J.D. continued. I spent years in corporate law. I saw how the system worked, from the inside. I saw how it was built to keep certain people up and certain people down. And then one day I had a choice. Keep playing the game or start changing the rules. J.D. leaned in. I don't regret the choice I made. Bennett could feel it now. It wasn't just respect. It was belief. J.D. had done what no politician had done in a long time. He had made people believe in something. And Bennett? He was just another voice trying to tear it down. A shift happened in real time, small but undeniable. Some of Bennett's own viewers, the ones who had tuned in expecting another takedown, another scandal, another gotcha moment, were suddenly rooting for the other guy. And in the world of television, that was checkmate. Bennett swallowed his pride. He had one last play, end it before it got worse. Well, Mr. Vice President, it's clear you have your vision. We'll see if the American people believe in it the way you do. A safe exit, a way to cut losses. Move on. Pretend this night hadn't just happened. But J.D. wasn't done. They already do, Marcus. The audience erupted, not in applause, not in outrage, but in something far rarer, a moment of undeniable, unshakable energy. Because for the first time in a long time, people watching, both in the studio and at home, felt something that Washington had failed to give them for years. Hope. And Marcus Bennett, for the first time in his life, he had nothing left to say. This wasn't just a debate. It was a lesson in power, persuasion, and belief. In life, the ones who win aren't always the loudest, but the ones who tell a story people want to believe. In confidence beats fear, truth beats spin. So ask yourself, what story are you telling the world? What are your thoughts? Drop a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. And if you enjoyed this, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. Stay tuned for more.